Hey, thank you so much for tuning in yet again. Still having those insightful conversations with Mr. Andrew Mura, who is a licensed advocate of the High Court of Kenya, specializes in conveyancing, commercial law, as well as arbitration. Please, if you have not checked out the last few videos and the conversations we've had, you have to go back and watch those so you can understand my next one. And we're going to be discussing the history of land registration in Kenya. Where did it come from? How did we end up where we are today? You're watching Own Land in Kenya, and I'm Solomon Wangwe. So Andrew, thanks so much for breaking up or breaking down, the issue of the RLA, which is a new land registration regime that we operate under, and the RTA, which is
the old form.
The old form. I'm trying to remember.
Act.
Yes, the Registration of Titles Act.
Correct.
That's the one.
Yes.
But what's the history? And when did it change, and why was it changing from one particular kind of regime to the next to where we are today?
Okay.
What's the history? And this has to do, for clarity, the registration of ownership regimes.
Yes. Let me start with a small clarification.
Yeah.
So the last regime was the Registration of Lands Act, right? Now in 2010 we got the new constitution, which tried to amalgamate all this RLA, RTA, all these lands into one, and Land Registration Act.
Yes.
This essentially means that all titles, be it RTA, RLA, GLA, Government Lands Act, all get to come under this new fold of registration. Now, a little history. I'll take you as far back as 1896, I believe, where the British were coming into Kenya. They wanted a more formal way of owning land. Most people are familiar with the hat tax. You know, for you to own land, you needed to pay certain taxes. All that. Now, there was what was known as a coastal strip. The coastal strip was what was essentially owned by the Sultan of Zanzibar.
Yes.
That coastal strip, the agreement was for the Brits to come in, they don't touch that.
Okay.
So somehow, out of that arose what came to be known as the Coast Registry.
Okay.
CR. In fact, in some of the titles you'll see under the Government Lands Act,
yes, GLA.
There's GLA, you'll see a small initial CR, meaning this land really started from the coastal arrangement of ownership of land.
Okay.
Then alongside that was IR, which was under the Registration of Titles Act, RTA. IR was Inland Registry.
Okay,
so at one point,
separate from the coastal registry.
Yes, because at one point there were only two registries in the whole country, Nairobi
and
Mombasa. So CR and IR.
Did not know that. That's good to know.
Yeah. Okay. So under the GLA, Government Lands Act, they essentially wanted to now start the conveyancing process. Now the interesting thing about all these regimes is that each of them had a different way of transferring land. Right now, we only refer to a transfer document.
Okay.
In fact, if I should surprise you, the term conveyancing came from the GLA document of transfer.
Okay.
It was actually called a conveyance, an instrument of conveyance.
Right.
So back in those days, you didn't have the title written transfer. It used to be called conveyance. Instrument of conveyance. Right. Now the instrument of...
Which is what conveyance means.
Correct.
Transfer.
It means to transfer the land. Now, under the GLA system, under the RTA system, they've always had a history of each and every file.
Yes.
So from the point at which there was one title, then it was subdivided, then upon that subdivision, who did it go to? And then, so you're able to follow that. In fact, under the RTA system, when you look at the titling system, in fact, I wish I could get you a sample of an RTA title.
Yeah.
It'll show you each entry is marked as IR number 1/20.
Okay.
Meaning, at the point at which this title was subdivided, it became IR number 1.
Okay.
Then there have been 20 transactions under that one.
Okay.
Until maybe a process where the land was again subdivided,
Further.
and then a new number 1 starts with a different serialization,
Okay.
and then processes commence from there.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
That's interesting.
Now, the RLA system really came from the White Highlands.
The White Highlands.
Yes.
I love that term. what does that mean?
That throws you
For
back
those who
into
don't
your...
know, because me, I know.
Yes. Back in the day, there were...
I remember that from history.
yes, from history. There used to be reserve lands.
Mm-hmm.
Reserve lands used to be where most of the Africans would live, while the White Highlands were essentially the agricultural...
The agriculturally productive zones that
Exactly.
were hived off
Yes.
for our colonial masters to enjoy
Exactly.
exclusively.
Yes. So you'll find that almost all property that has tea growing, coffee growing,
Yep.
pyrethrum, all those things were always under RLA. Because the RLA system assumed, in a manner of speaking, an easier way of doing things. You
Okay.
just transfer the land, you get a new title, you're able to get security on it. Whereas for these other lands, and this is now a little bit more supposition as well, a lot of this land were communal lands.
Yes.
So you needed to know who owned this land before I own it.
Right.
Yes.
Interesting. So it was basically born out of a segregation type of mechanism to manage colonial space versus indigenous occupied
Yes.
space.
And you'll find that an interesting thing is in Nairobi at this place called, I happened to do a transaction on a land in just next to State House on Dennis Pritt Road,
Okay.
which was a GLA property. It had a conveyance,
Okay.
meaning, yes, the intention was mooted back in the early 1900s,
Yes.
but some of the properties that fell into the cracks of these divisions
Yes.
were not very seamless. And I think that's why under the 2010 constitution, they tried to make it as clean as possible. Put everything under one, and when they said put everything under one, they adopted that RLA system.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very, very interesting perspective to have. I hope that's made sense to you guys and that you've learned something, because I've definitely learned something about the history of land ownership in Kenya, which many of us, admittedly, including myself, have been ignorant about. The reason I love to know is because it gives me a renewed appreciation for the privilege that we do have of owning land privately and passing it on to our descendants, whether it be our spouses who survive us, our children, our children's children. We have neighboring countries today that do not have that privilege because of war, famine, lack of centralized government. These are things that Kenyans, take for granted far too often. And I love to understand what our history is because it helps me appreciate the privilege we have to own land, which I actually think is a God-given right. But man has his role to play in that getting effected. So thanks for explaining that, man. That's really helpful. If you have questions, more questions about that, feel free to reach out to us or get in touch with Andrew directly. All his contact information is just below us. We're happy to even engage with you over the phone. 0700010001. Again, that's 0700010001, and we'll be happy to engage. You're watching Own Land in Kenya. Stay tuned for more information on strategic and safe land investment.